So, Salon.com, the writer, Anis Shivani, whatever the hell that is.
Anis Shivani.
Time to give up on identity politics is dragging the progressive agenda down. This thing thinks that there's brakes on this train. That
I think, is he a Pajit? Because I was like trying to figure it out. Like I assume
definitely.
some kind of like big brain nibba Pajit, like centrist.
Yeah, he's like a big brain Pajit. He's not a centrist, but he's big brained. But
this is nice.
Shivani
I don't know,
pretty
man.
much
I
gives it
couldn't
away.
really tell that he was like liberal. He just seemed to be like this big brain, like objective nibba. This political analyst.
That just shows how far to the left you are, Alex.
Yeah. Well, he opens with a big fat signal about how woke and big brain he is. I didn't come around to disliking identity politics recently. Long before the 2016 election, 15 years ago, in fact, I predicted the kind of white identitarian politics that eventually come to fruition in the last election. So he's very big brain. He predicted 15 years ago that the alt-right would come to prominence in as a response to the left's identity politics, which is pretty fair, and I think we've often admitted that's the case. That's what pushed you over the edge.
I'm not going
right?
to deny it.
No, how can you? And it seemed to me inevitable from the beginning that white nationalism would arise as a necessary outgrowth if liberals kept up with their identity politics obsession, and that is precisely where we find ourselves. So it always felt like snake oil to me. I never bought into it when I was a student being exposed to its early manifestations, and as a writer, I've rebelled against it from the very beginning. He's really signaling hard about how much he doesn't like it, and he's never liked it, and he just goes on and on and on to... It's fun. Alex, you were just reading it. Did you find any money quotes you liked in there? I mean, he goes through Fukuyama, the end of history stuff.
If you're going to read this article, what you need to do, he's got bullet points. Like, pick those out.
That's some
because he's got like it privileges culture instead of politics. Yeah. So I guess his point is that you end up just advocating for an identity group instead of taking a hardline political position on something. It's like, okay, and like,
I know it's like problem? Funny how that works out. You know.
Okay, and so my group wins, and we don't really have to kowtow to some sort of objective like political premise. What's the problem? I don't understand.
Yeah. In many American cities, as in mine, the fight is on for transgender bathrooms, even as local government leaders who often fit the bill where identity politics is concerned have worked closely with super capitalists to gentrify the urban centers, leading to the mass eviction of working people who created the interesting cultural realities in the first place. So having a slum filled with work, quote unquote, big fat air quotes, working people who created the diversity that's fine interesting.
Hold up. A crisis of affordable housing? So we don't have enough places to keep poor violent niggers?
I don't even feel like dealing with that bullshit.
No, I mean that's the thing. This article, when he's trying to make these like honest points about policy and things, like they're fraught with these little nuggets of basically just propaganda,
shit liberty.
Yeah, like he believes the bullshit almost. Like the crisis of affordable housing. It's like, well, no, dude, they just wanted to build a lot of it. They pretended there was a crisis so that they could get some of it built. And basically, the incentives for around a lot of towns and counties is if you build one house, you better build an equal amount of low income ones to go along with it, or else you're not building nothing. Mr. Super Capitalist Gentrification Man. So it's pretty ridiculous stuff. But yeah, I like that.
Point 2 is kind of funny because he basically starts hitting on libertarian angles here.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a little bit all over the place. Basically, the anti-identity politics is sort of the last refuge of the big brain nigga.
Yeah.
But anyway, keep going.
Yeah. 2, not only politics, but economics is taken out of the equation. It's astonishing, even after living under the principles of neoliberalism for around 40 years, how few liberals, even activists, are able to define our economic system with any sense of accuracy. They keep acting as if the fight is still on between the old New Deal liberalism, laissez-faire economics slightly moderated by some half-hearted welfare programs, and a right that wants to shred those welfare mechanisms. In fact, both parties are committed to slightly different versions of neoliberalism. Big brain nibba right there.
But he's not wrong.
Right. And their transformation proceeded to apace with the rise of identity politics. Politics was free to take its course because culture became the site of contestation. And this meant an unobstructed opportunity to redefine economics to the benefit of the elites. It's kind of all over the place there, and like, where's the lie? But yeah,
no, that's true. I mean, like, okay.
Well, I mean, we got to be a little bit careful here. But there is some truth to the idea that, I mean, one of the things that that sort of the hard left, and I think he's like kind of mixing a bunch of different tendencies here. So to say he's this or that, like there's a number of different points. One of the things that the hard Marxist left that has always been against identity politics, one of their things is always that like essentially identity politics are what the elite use to divide the working class and prevent working class of all colors from uniting. Now, I don't think that's true, and I also don't see that the working class of multiple different races, ethnicities, and whatever will ever work together because well, whatever. I'll finish my spiel on it, but when we get through with that, that's a very old school Marxist talking point, though, that he's bringing up there.
Yeah,
that's
it's got
I still see
trouble too.
Yeah,
like they run contrary to the liberal establishment when they take that line.
Well, they also, what happens is they get attacked by people like Yvette Falarka and some of these hardcore identity like left identitarian, like anti-white left identitarians attack that, and they say that that is what white males say to attempt to exert control over female and black bodies on the left and things like that. And by white males they mean Jewish males, but still, yeah. So it's like you remember that there was that website a while ago that was like all like it was like the 50 point, it was like some Native American woman was like the 50 points of like white Native American allies and why they all suck, and I was like so you get these white people come and try to help Native Americans, and like this fucking bitch writes like 50 reasons why they're horrible people anyway, and it's like, all right, like, yeah.
I like the next couple paragraphs in this thing are just, at least this first one.
The third point is pretty good.
Well, before we get to that, I just like the utter cluelessness and refusal to sort of recognize what happened in the presidential election. I really love reading stuff like this. So it's a little off topic, but consider that in the last election, the contest became mostly about Hillary Clinton's personality. She's a woman, therefore I must be with her. Versus Donald Trump's personality. He's a misogynist, therefore I must oppose him. Hillary Clinton's neoliberalism, reflected in over 30 years of policy commitments, got little attention from the media, just as the economic dimensions of Trump's proposals got barely any attention. I mean, there are so many levels of I have no idea what's going on and I don't know why it's happening.
No. Let me counter signal at it. I completely agree with what he said.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, he doesn't. It's like he's either feigning or he doesn't know why these things took place. Like, why was Clinton's neoliberalism?
I mean, what's his next point? I mean, he was correct so far. So what further point does he make? Any point at all?
He just goes on to rehash, recent history, Bush, Clinton, and Reagan.
Okay. Because he seemed to ignore the fact. I mean, maybe he's ignoring, or maybe he just doesn't know. Because a lot of these liberals honestly don't know what we say because they don't consume our media. They consume media about us, so they don't know what we say. They're not listening to what we're actually saying. Mm-hmm. But one of the main reasons we were supporting Trump was economic populism. I mean, that was one of our favorite things about him. Was the economic populism. And he seems to ignore that, but he seems to be hinting at the fact without saying it that effectively Trump's economic agenda would have been more suitable for like kind of a center-left type candidate than a right-wing candidate if you go on the traditional free market socialism, the free market scale.
Yeah, but he says the proposals got barely any attention. I don't think that was really true.
I think it was true. I don't think that I don't think the media focused at all on the economic aspects of Trump's agenda. Like, I think they focused all on him being an evil racist that wanted to deport Mexicans while never talking about the effect that mass immigration has on the wage rate. I actually think he's right there.
All right. Well, I mean, I think they're talking about it a lot to try to counter.
He's mostly right for the entirety of the article, to be honest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We
should get this guy on the show.
You want to get him on the show?
We should.
I'll tweet at him. I'll see if I can get him.
Yeah. You're looking for anus Siobhan.
Let's actually talk about this.
Identity.
But I mean, we'll see.
Point 3: identity politics always breeds its equal and opposite reaction.
Yes.
Identity politics is in fact the father or great mother of white nationalism, rather than white nationalism being an independent force that has risen from quite different sources. At root, both share the same.
He's wrong there.
Particularistic. Okay, give us that.
That'll
be more interesting. Than
well, I will say it's true. It's true that the current white nationalist movement arose in opposition to leftist identity politics. That is absolutely
okay.
You wouldn't say that about
true.
Nazi Germany too, because that seems
However,
fairly accurate there too.
However, I think that the idea that white people would band together and create nations for themselves is older than leftist identity politics. For example, the United States was formed as a white nation. Now, they weren't doing that to fight some kind of leftist identity politics. They were doing that because they had experience with people of other races, and it was also at that time in history simply common sense that a nation state was a polity for an ethnic group. You know, like that was
that is default. You know, so the United States,
right? Like that was just default wisdom, and now that would be called identity politics. But it was just sort of like, oh well, duh, like like English for the England for the English, France for the French, etc., etc. Right? Like it's just like anybody that would have like said that should be different would have been looked at like askance. Like people would be like, what? Yeah. What are you even talking about? Like they wouldn't have even understood the concept of like a multicultural propositional nation. Like that wasn't even a concept.
Right.
So while I do agree that in the wake of the Cultural Revolution, in the wake of the, our Cultural Revolution was based in the 60s. Now Jews wielded power and they wielded influence prior to that, and they were able to control the military and all things like that. But the 1960s was when the Cultural Revolution happened, when they gained total power, and they also broke down the pro-white immigration policies. And ever since then, that's when the rise of left identity politics happened. Oh, everybody's civil rights, white people are racist. Now it's gone absolutely out of control, and that's definitely spurred the new white nationalism and the new alt-right and the new white identity politics, which had been dormant for 40 to 50 years. It had been effectively suppressed, and it's not being effectively suppressed anymore. But we also now look back further to the founding of the nation. We're like, hey, holy shit, the founders knew everything that we're rediscovering. So
yeah, and that's pretty much true of our right-wing movement in general. It's just you rediscover things that were just taken for granted many, many years ago.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, anyway. Sorry, I keep fucking up your narratives. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm just reading the things. Do narratives. Do the bit.
Okay.
Do the bit.
Number 4. Identity politics is not winnable.
Now this I disagree about.
The idea
That's
of
totally wrong.
The idea of the nation in a post-Cold War world, as my generation imagined for a moment, should have led to a redefinition of the concept in rational, empirical, scientific, utopian, and ultimately anarchist terms. The founding principles of the Enlightenment were available.
Oh, he gave it away.
The founding principles of the Enlightenment were available all over again in that brief moment to be recharged with potent liberal energy extending across the globe. Instead, we got neoliberal globalization dedicated entirely to consumerism and shallow identity politics. What a fucking dick. Working in sync to enervate democracy to the point of non-existence.
Yeah, he's not entirely wrong here, but he finally gave it away. So he's a big brain nibble anarchist. Okay, I get it.
I think he's kind of. I think he's further to like. He's not like a centrist liberal. Like he's further to the left, and you can tell how he's talking about like the focus on class politics, which is actually something that really is reserved for people that are still kind of on the far left, and something I have a grudging respect for those people. Like I really do, because it seems like it's less. There's something more noble about it than there is just this.
At least they're ideologically consistent.
Yeah.
No, they have an ethos. They have an ethos.
Yeah. Say what you will. Say what you will about class war politics. At least it's an ethos. But but the thing is that those guys ultimately see us as a bigger threat than the identitarians of the left. Like they get mad at the identity politics on the left because they're saying, look, if you keep attacking white people, like they're gonna get mad and fight back at some point. Which is something that the mainstream left, the identity politics neoliberal left, they don't care about it. And if they did care about it, they would just say, okay, bring it on. We'll kill them. You know what I mean? Which that won't happen, but that's what they would say. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of good points here, but he's missing out. I think the fundamental delusion of the anti-identity politics point on the left is that it's just not true, right? Like the idea that you could unite people across races, cultures, ethnicities based on class alone, it has empirically proven to be false. It's
never happened. Yeah, so it's always been false.
Right. So like you're holding up essentially a pipe dream against kind of a fundamental reality.
It's fun because
which is that of ethnic difference, ethnic conflict, and ethnic in-group preference. Yeah. Like you can't hold up. I mean, I think on some level you might have some cases where you'll get people of different races that are in the same kind of class predicament that will both hate, you know, the guy that's oppressing them or whatever. Like, but across the board, you know, for a whole nation, you're never going to get that in terms of politics, and particularly, I mean, how is it that it just? I mean, despite the fact that neoliberalism presented itself as this deracinated, like everybody is just this identityless consumer. I mean, he's proposing a Marxist alternative that is like a mirror image of a neoliberal globalist paradigm, in which the neoliberal globalist paradigm is everybody is a consumer. Everybody, you know, we buy and sell on the market and we move freely or whatever. And you don't have identities other than, you know, constructed identities, gender identities, and identities that have to do with like your consumer preferences, right? There's no sort of core to anybody's identity. And the Marxist believes that too. They just want a different economic setup. They don't want it to be a capitalist consumerist. They want it to be like some kind of anarchist, commune, socialist thing. But it's really just two sides of the same coin, the way, you know, neoliberal or the way libertarian and communists are two sides of the same coin. They both present an economic utopia in which everybody's equal effectively, and race, gender, you know, culture, those things don't matter. And I think that those are pipe dreams. So and they haven't ever been proven to be true. Like you can't actually do it. Like, and despite the fact that our politics have been deracinated and not mentioning race or pretending everybody until recently now, when the left identitarians, you know, since really in the 2000s, since then they've gone full bore anti-white. But before that, everything was kind of like, oh, colorblind, blah, blah, blah. Yet the Democrat Party ended up the party of minorities and white guilt liberals. And the Republican Party was the party of white people. I mean, it's not the way the parties fall racially is quite striking when you look. I mean, a lot of TRS people, myself and others being, you know, urbanites, we really only interact with like really shit-libby bug people, like liberal white bug people. But that's not the majority of white people by... No, but this is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You being in rural Virginia, you don't see those people hardly at all. Like, that's the thing. It's like the bug men are a phenomena, and it's a phenomena I deal with a lot, but they're a minority. They're a small minority of white people. The vast majority of white people are, in fact, like kind of basic bitch conservatives that believe in you know, the rule of law, in free markets, in God and religion, and if you break a law, you get punished. You know, kind of like these sort of core basic values, and those are white values, right? Like, the reason that all the people that believe that way, with the exception of a few outliers from other races, are white, I mean, it's because identity is real. Like the whole fundamental premise behind this guy's point of hating identity politics is the idea that identities are not real. They're constructed somehow. They're false. That we're all just human. That we all interact, and the only way we interact is economically. You know, the only way we interact is economically, and you are either a producer, consumer, proletariat, bourgeoisie, whatever, based on your material relation to the means of production or whatever. And it denies that there's any human identity other than that.
Yeah.
Well, you know? It is funny, but this guy also, you got to remember, this guy's an Indian. Okay, so he's not a Jew, he's not white, but he's also not black or brown. I mean, he's brown, but he's not black or Hispanic. So he's not a member of really. And in the United States, Indians are not net tax consumers. Okay, they are some of the highest earning people. That's in the United States. I'm not talking about in India. This guy's in India, in Indian in the U.S., where Indians are very high earners and they're net tax contributors. In India, that's a whole other story, as we know.
Right.
You know, they have 500 million people that defecate in the open. So, so this guy being a net tax contributor and a non-white in the United States, obviously he's against identity politics. Obviously he wants the United States to be a colorblind place. Now, typically he just would get on board with neoliberalism, but for whatever reason, maybe he imbibed Marxism at some point or whatever. But, of course, he wants a colorblind politics because he's an Indian, because he is not white, but he's also not a recipient of the largesse of the anti-white system, other than the fact that he's allowed to be here and take advantage of our society and our markets and our institutions and all that stuff. But he's not directly taking from the pockets of white people, and you know what I mean? Like blacks and Hispanics are just their welfare, they're net recipients of everything, right? He's not that. He's an Indian, so he's probably from a high-earning household, very educated, etc. So, of course, he's like, well, I don't like this. Because he doesn't like the rent-seeking of the lower-class non-whites, but he also doesn't want to see a backlash of identity politics from the whites, because that means he has to go back to India, where 500 million people defecate in the open.
Shitting in the street.
So like, it really makes sense, you know what I mean? And I hate to do the one, like, sort of, it's kind of a little bit of an ad hominem, I guess, to say, well, you're only making this argument because of who you are. But I mean, it makes sense that the guy making this argument is against
it. Makes sense he's against identity politics, since you're making the argument based on who he is. It's like, he's like, no, please don't do that.
I don't know. I guess my read is he's probably a Sternerite, like anarchist, like, oh, dude, race and ethnicity, man, that's a spook. It's just a spook.
Oh, I'm sure that he is. But why does he think that?
Because he's a big brain nigga.
Like, he's a big brain nigga, but I mean, a lot of times that was a similar argument that white leftists would make, and white, you know, like a lot of white leftists would get into this, and libertarians too would get into this, oh, race, ethnicity is a spook, whatever. And the reason being, for those people, because they were essentially socially forbidden from ever doing it. Right, like in the environment in which white identity politics are verboten, of course, you know, white people will be like, well, I'm against all identity politics, right? And that even became a thing that leftists would mock, right? The left identitarians would say, you know, like the pro-blacks, the pro-Hispanics, whatever the fuck, anti-whites would say to white people that are like, well, identity doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, like, we're all people equal under the laws, the Constitution, the blah, blah, this, that. They would get fucking ruthlessly mocked for that shit. Right? They would be like, oh, that's your white privilege speaking. Oh, you're colorblind because that's privilege speaking, etc., etc. It's like, no, it's just white people trying to negotiate this political minefield.
Right.
And they don't know what they can do or say, so they say that. But that's coming to an end. Because now white people are realizing, yeah, you know, this shit won't end. There's fundamental differences here. And on top of that, this is our country. It's our fucking country.